Hello and welcome to another edition of iGaming Next Power Hour. I'm Jake Evans, Managing Editor at iGaming Next and your host for today. We have a variety of guests lined up throughout today's Power Hour session and we'll be discussing a wide range of topics, all focused on one of the hottest new areas in the iGaming industry, the US market. Joining me throughout today's show, we have Simon Lidzen from Fast Track, and he'll be joined by Ozric Vondervelden from Greco. Rick Wolf is also here from Spotlight Sports Group and Brian Clayton from IMG Arena. And then finally, we'll have Jonathan Doubilet from Playtech. Without further ado, let's get going with today's first session. Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce our first two special guests of today's session. Joining me now are Simon, who is the Chief Executive and Co-Founder at Fast Track, and Ozric, who is the Co-Founder of Greco. And I'm sure most of our audience will know both of you already. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Super cool to be here.
So, we don't have long. 15 minutes, so let's get straight into it. I know there's plenty you want to discuss today, but we've heard so much about customer acquisition in the US and the extraordinarily high spend on marketing to that end, and these companies, a lot of them seemingly have unlimited budgets, and kind of only now are we seeing that investor appetite dry up a little bit after they've sort of added the numbers up and realized that there's not really any clear path to profitability as such. But that's acquisition. What about retention? What's the kind of state of the US market in your eyes, Simon? Let's begin with you.
I think it's in its infancy. I think you're right in saying that there has been a little bit of a race to the market. All of the operators, rightfully so, want to pick up their piece. They want to get their brand known. They want to get out there. And they want to start building a customer base which they can continue to retain. But yeah, if you're looking at the current state, it's in its infancy in terms of deploying sort of what I would call a modern or sort of up to date or leading sort of CRM strategy. There is a lot to be done there as far as my research goes. It's very ad hoc still, and managed on fairly legacy sort of ways of transacting. It mirrors pretty much like how we used to be working 10 years ago in the industry, even in Europe. So there is a huge challenge in terms of getting across there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think operators have been quite vocal that they're sort of just starting out on that journey, and they're willing to spend whatever it takes in the hope that spend reduces over time, and I guess that's where the retention side of things comes into play, right? You want to retain those customers that are valuable to you, keep them coming back in terms of loyalty, and how can that be achieved? If you were the chief executive of one of these big US operators, what would be your kind of main priorities as of now?
I think interestingly enough, we got obviously both myself and Ozric in the room right now, but I would say that there are two key priorities that any chief executive at one of these operators would be thinking or talking about right now both in their operational leadership meetings and on the board level, and that's obviously to make a return out of that sort of vast expense that you've spent now to get your customers in the door. And then it comes down to two things. It's going to be retention, which is one aspect in order to make sure that the players that you have keep playing with you. And number two, as we have had we paid such a high price for these customers and have these sort of offers at the level they have been, it's also attracted maybe the risk and the exposure from an operator perspective in attracting the bad type of player, like there's trying to abuse you, is obviously incredibly much larger. And I'll let Ozric talk about that. That's at his game.
So just to give some insight into what we're seeing, we're doing a research piece at the moment, which we're going to be announcing at iGaming Next in New York. So I have some kind of half-baked numbers anyway from what we've done so far. So, I mean, the value of casino offers in New Jersey, so just casino offers in just New Jersey, are worth $13,000, and that's per player. And that's also a figure in terms of conversion. That's what the player can convert, not just the face value of the offers. And that's across 31 brands, and it's accessible to over 9 million people. And it can be achieved in less than a week. Somebody trying to take this value. So in terms of exposure, it's huge. It's magnitudes more than any other market. For contrast, in the UK, the value of taking advantage of these offers, which is over 200 brands, collectively is £2,000. So it's, we're talking $13,000 over 31 brands, or £2,000 over 200 brands. So in some ways, I think the industry is manufacturing its own problem. I'm seeing the bonus abuse forums kind of setting up shop in the US. I'm seeing threads discussing ways of individuals getting residency in the US in order to go and make a career out of this, because the skills already exist. It's just they're not in the right location. So, I've had tip-offs from multi-accounting operations in the US that are going from campus to campus, hiring identities, paying them thousands for an identity they can borrow for a week because they can. And I'm seeing the exchanges move in as well, or attempting to move into the US, which, judging by the UK's history, this really boosts bonus abuse, because kind of exploiting sportbooks is considered entry level in terms of cheating casinos, and the exchanges facilitate that. So yeah, I think I think there's a lot of risk in the US at the moment. I think most of the US budget is concentrated on acquisitions, and I think there's a kind of negative feedback loop in that regard. I think a lot of operators are going with the same kind of high value marketing strategy. And what that means is the players then have less loyalty because they can just move on to the next shiny offer. And I think there's a risk in having a two-part marketing strategy, in that you might not have any players left when it comes to retention. I think the focus needs to be on retention now.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's great that you provided some of those facts and figures to support those points of view. And New Jersey is really it's quite a mature gaming market in terms of US states, but you're right, the focus is indeed on acquisition, and maybe, Simon, there's a chance now for some operators to kind of break that mold and move away from the chasing pack if they move beyond that and start to look a bit further ahead in terms of future revenues. Is that right, would you say?
No, but I think everyone is conscious about it, in terms of attracting these players, and that there is a pure intention to keep these players on the site. But I think no one is going to be diluted in the sense that we know that there is going to be a share of wallet. We know that customers are going to experience gameplay at multiple sites before they potentially pick their home. So I think there's a huge opportunity to still develop deep, meaningful relationships with customers. And this comes down to sort of now they have a chance as well, coming in quite fresh to the market, to do this the right way already from the beginning, and have quite an impact in doing so. And I think there is now is the right time to ensure that you have the organizational scalability to support such an exercise. And when I'm talking about that, I essentially look for operators to develop those meaningful relationships with customers, so that you see every individual in your database, rather than looking at these huge sort of marketing towards groups, entire groups at one time. You try to really nail down the player profiles and see what really matters, and work in a data-driven fashion in order to deliver one-to-one experiences that are tailored for each individual depending on what they like and what they came there to play, now beyond the sign-up bonus in itself. But it's going to give you a good indication already with the data that you have in hand in how you can sort of very early on in a player's journey be able to sort of profile the player and be able to target them effectively with the right follow-up offers. But it is fundamental that we in this, because this is a bigger problem now in the US than it has ever been in Europe. It's going to be in terms of actually separating the good players from the bad players, so that when you're focusing your marketing money for retention, that you're investing the money in the right place and that you're providing the right level of entertainment. Because the danger here is that you have a huge database, and once you're trying to retain them and create interesting campaigns and offers, you essentially entertain your bonus abuse network with more bonuses, and you upsell them and you get them to extract even more money. And that's like what you want to avoid in this. So there is like a twofold here. That like has accelerated the need for the type of work and platform that Ozric does so well together with his team, but also in terms of the type of technology that Fast Track brings to the table in be able to scale with your retention initiatives and be able to do so efficiently. So there's a lot of work to be done, but there's still huge opportunity in order to get the most out of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, there's two solutions right there, and I guess one of the issues that operators have is that they need obviously different states to legalize online sports betting and iGaming to increase the TAM and the future profitability. But every time a new state opens, these acquisition offers are going to be there again, and the risk of abuse heightens. So how do we sort of get to that stage that you're talking about? Because is it just the fact that the market is still kind of in its immaturity at the moment that
I think
perhaps
there's
it hasn't been realised just yet?
An opportunity to actually jump the gun. So we've seen this in the UK, more than a decade ago, a kind of race to the bottom acquisition strategy, and not every operator survived. Those that had poor retention generally didn't. And so I think there's an opportunity here for the US to focus on retention. I think there might even be an argument for focusing on retention over acquisitions, because at the end of the day, when they've reached market saturation, it's about who you've got left, not how many you acquired initially.
No, I agree with Ozric here, and I think there is we have seen this a lot of times in Europe. Both me and Ozric has been active for quite some time in the European, obviously, market and so on. And you've seen often that by face value, the casinos being launched in Europe and coming into the market and being quite aggressive on sign-up offers, they turn out a perceived sort of high inflation of revenue into the brand very quickly, which is then extracted from the brand in whatever way that's happening with the players. And then quickly the business might be in the risk of falling over, or requiring additional funding in order to do that second exercise, which is then actually operating in a scalable way with the right economy that warrants. And so I think the business that is coming in right now, I can't judge in terms of exactly how the operators are looking at it, but I would heavily sort of promote that they have the right KPIs right now, not just looking at the sort of the acquisition value of the players over the first couple of deposits, but actually actively look at how many of those are staying on for consecutive deposits without bonuses, and looking at that as well, so that they are qualifying that the database is not entirely just extracting that value, that face value, and then leaving them dry. But I'm quite sure that it is quite a significant piece of the database that are you are attracting a lot of sort of illegitimate play, if you want, or bad players or such, that wants to expose you value-seeking players for whatever reason, whether it's a legitimate player that is seeking value, or whether it's sort of a player that is actually looking to actively abuse you. You are going to expose a lot more risk with a much more aggressive bonus strategy, which means you need to have a handle on this. But that's I would strongly sort of suggest that any operator that is in the market right now has a keen eye on measuring the KPIs around the retention-driven metrics and see at least where you're trending with it to see how urgent it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, everyone outside looking in is casting a glance at these US operators to see who's going to be winning in the long term. And I think whichever one kind of gets on top of this certainly gives itself a major advantage there. But yeah, I mean, fantastic. Thank you very much for joining me today, Simon and Ozric. That was some awesome insights. And like you said, you're going to build on that at our iGaming Next New York event, hopefully.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Plenty more to come from you two. And thank you very much again for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the session, guys.
Thank you very much.
Hello again, everybody, and it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce a person with one of the best names in our industry by a long way, Rick Wolf, who I'm sure many of you know already, who is Senior Vice President of B2B Partnerships at Spotlight Sports Group. Rick, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me, Jake. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about Spotlight.
Yeah, no problem at all. Great to have you with us. We've had a really good, engaging session so far, and it's really going to be interesting to speak to somebody, obviously, with your background. For those that don't know, Rick has one of the most amazing track records that I can recall, certainly, in the kind of US sports media landscape. Perhaps you could just give us a really quick summary of it, because we've only got 15 minutes. But yeah, your background is amazing, so let's hear about it.
Yeah, I would say quickly, I call myself the Forrest Gump of sports, because I was lucky enough to be in the right rooms where really, really smart people were executing some really amazing things. So, starting with being able to write the first software for fantasy baseball in 1989 with IBM, and then being on the team that founded and started Sportsline USA, which became CBSSports.com after a public offering in 1997, and then being the one who pushed RotoWorld.com out to be a destination site in 2001, and then having it be bought by NBC in 2006, and then being able to be on the ground floor of really the rebuild of NBCSports.com and NBCOlympics.com in those next 5 years. And then, of course, the most recent journey, which has been a fantastic one since 2014, the Alarm Sports Network, sort of building the infrastructure for NBCSports.com and Edge, and helping them get that off the ground in 2019. And to be a part of this big organization now after an acquisition in September of 2021, being acquired by Spotlight Sports Group, and now being part of something that is just super exciting to be in that room with a lot of smart people and my 75 IQ.
Yeah, for sure. You're too modest, Rick. You didn't get a career like that just by being in the right place at the right time. But yeah, you mentioned how exciting the environment is right now, and that's obviously what we've come here to talk about today. And one thing that's really important for Spotlight is kind of how you redirect customers into those big online sports books that we've talked about. As we know, a lot of US operators or media businesses have a big engaged database of daily fantasy sports, DFS players, which I know is something you're very familiar with.
Yeah.
How can you, or rather your clients, monetize that engaged audience and kind of get them to take that leap from DFS and into sports betting?
Yeah, well, one of the things about what we do is it's all custom. So it depends on who your audience. It'll analyze your audience, and then we'll figure out how to get there. And if you think about it, every sports fan is either a casual fan, a team fan, a fantasy fan, a gambler, a historian, or a collector. Okay, basically, you're either one or all or a lot of those. And so what we do is we custom look at your audience, we figure it out with your Google Analytics and other things, and then figure out how you can maximize how to make revenue from this by driving people into sports betting. And then honestly, after that, the sports betting houses will be driving them to iCasino. So iGaming. So we'll be driving them directly to iGaming in a lot of cases from each one of those different sports verticals. So.
Okay, that's interesting. So even if you have, sort of sports-led network, sometimes you'll be driving the consumer straight to iGaming rather than sports betting.
Yes, yeah. Well, it depends on the audience, right? So, and if the audience, let's say they're casual fans, so basically, they're just watching to see whether or not, what LeBron is doing tonight. Then we'll take those news items and then we'll drive them directly to iGaming affiliation for what that audience is. So what I've said since the beginning here, and it's actually something I stole from Peter Naughton, who founded Sun Microsystems. He said every web war will be won by content personalization and interactivity. Okay, so you want to be at a place where you feel like you belong. So we create ecosystems that allow people to feel like they belong, and then we can monetize them in different ways, whether it's sports betting affiliation, iGaming affiliation, or subscriptions, or straight advertising. So we help you get that ecosystem together so that you can drive all of those monetization mechanisms, and then we either share in them or you pay us development fees.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and that kind of sense of belonging is what sort of elevates the end user experience and the customer experience, and that's what generates that brand loyalty, which I guess is what you and a lot of your clients are striving for in the US. It's such a saturated marketplace though, with a lot of different media sites, be it affiliates, be it traditional news written content media. How do you kind of compete in that marketplace, and what are you doing to ensure there is that level of trust there?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is to be able to differentiate, is to be able to understand the pain points and the difficulties that people may have within their businesses, and then help to solve them. So business development is basically a problem-solving game. So our ability then to get bigger clients who have difficulties generally with speed to market or with not having built software as a service. So we make sure we build both of those two things so that we can put the tools into administrators' hands instead of putting those tools into developers' hands, because developers' time is so critical at media companies that it's very difficult to get those. Plus security is so important. So, and we have that all buttoned up on the software as a service that we don't have to you don't have to have people, waiting weeks or months in order to make sure that they can develop and launch a product. We can basically give you the tools to be able to deliver it instantly.
Yeah, no, of course, that makes perfect sense. And I think, while there's a lot of priorities for these US operators at the moment, there's definitely that makes an opportunity for kind of third party technology suppliers, B2B providers, because they can't possibly do everything at once. It's a kind of Herculean task to manage that technology journey. And, we've heard time and time again, technology is a major hot topic in the US industry right now. I mean, you've got the kind of proprietary versus third-party debate, and whether companies should be spending huge money on bringing some technology companies in-house so they can kind of, get better control of that tech and product journey. But for those that aren't quite able to do that, how can you kind of help them out with that tech and sort of take on some of the heavy lifting of their load?
Yeah, well, the key thing is in two words: self-service. So if we create an infrastructure for you that attaches to your WordPress, or we build the ecosystem for you to deliver your content and other services through us, we can then add onto that a tools maker, which allows administrators to create their own tools online, and we can add a games maker, which allows them to create their own games. For instance, just recently for a client, they thought they might want to try an Oscars game. So we had the game engine put on that. We had an administrator go in and type in some questions, and within 20 or 30 minutes, we had an Oscars game live on their site for people to predict what was going to happen at the Oscars. Not that anyone could have predicted what actually happened at the Oscars, but no, we didn't have a question that said, is Chris Rock going to get an open hand slap in the face? No, we didn't have a question that asked that. But we did have,
the algorithm didn't quite work that well.
No. But we did have, who will win Best Actor, who would win Best Actress, and those things, so people could have a fun game to compete with each other for a small prize. I think it was $100 US. But that's the kind of engagement that creates, and then think about how that can directly affiliate to iGaming as opposed to sports betting. As the sports properties with huge media presences can then use these self-service games and tools in order to be able to drive affiliation to whatever they want to affiliate, whether it's apparel, tickets, iGaming, or sports betting. Now, we're focused on sports betting, but those other areas might be the focus of those media companies.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And obviously, that leans into the kind of gamification and loyalty discussion as well. And, these nice free-to-play games that aren't perhaps, directly related to sports betting or iGaming can be a really nice way to achieve that. Like you've just said with the Oscars piece, I never would have thought that would be possible to come up with in such a short space of time. But I guess that leads on to my next question, which is interesting. People think about affiliates or media companies, and they kind of think, there's this portfolio of B2C websites that kind of tell you how to sports bet, where you can get a sports bet on, what the offers are. And, I know there's a lot of brands in the Spotlight portfolio that do that, but it sounds like you guys offer, a much more comprehensive package of services that are, very different to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, from the things we did, I talked about the self-service stuff, but we also have smart content modules. They're what a lot of people in the industry call widgets, but because they contain content that's bespoke, that's written by our staff, and not by an AI engine. So it's way more human focused. Like an AI engine can't know exactly whether or not a particular athlete had a fight with his girlfriend on a particular day, where our analysts know that, and we know that might affect the performance, or we know how it affected his performance previously. So we believe that there's a manual effort that needs to go into these, and so these smart content modules are available for team-based for all sports, and by June 1st they'll be available for players for all prop lines as well. So we'll have player information, projections against the prop lines, and then also some skinny information written by some humans.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's great that there's still a place for that kind of manual legwork and that actual research that takes place, and that we're not just completely relying on AI or because there's nothing quite like human interaction. Like you say, that's where the edge comes from, right? In betting is when something that the market doesn't. AI
is fantastic. I mean, I was on the advisory board of Automated Insights, so I understand like how important it is and how you can do like 99% of it with that. But having that information put in front of a human so they can vet it and then add the 10% or the 5% is where you get to 100%, where the AI engine can't get there all by itself. Believe me, we use NLG and we use AI to press in front of people before that information goes in. And that way that allows us to license that stuff from other people who do it well too, so we can aggregate all of the good AI information in front of a human who figures out which ones to use.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's sort of the perfect combination, really, when you've got a lot of the technology doing the hard work and then the human mind sewing it all together at the end. That's perfect. And then just to go full circle and link back to something you said at the start about, I think it was the 7 different categories of sports bettors. Collectibles is one of them. Which one are you?
Which one am I? I am obviously a fantasy and sports bettor. And have been for a very long time. I mean, with Sportsline USA, we started Vegas Insider there in *96. So we were initially a sports betting company, and I was a big bettor in the late '90s, early 2000s. And of course, fantasy is in my DNA. But I'm also a collector, just a trading card collector, not an NFT collector. Although we did do some eTop stuff in the early 2000s. That was the early generation of NFTs, if you will. But just trading cards. For the most part, and just not that much of it now, but we just have a whole bunch of them, probably 20,000 to 30,000 baseball cards. So
that's awesome. And where do you that trend looks like it is very much heading into the digital space. I mean, and linking with fantasy sports as well. There's a lot of, all the big franchises, MLB, etc., trying to work out how they can capitalize on this NFT technology with basically virtual trading cards. I mean, that's not something that you've dabbled in just yet.
No, not yet. As far as purchasing them, other than a couple dabbling into Top Shots, just to really check out to see what it was like buying a couple NBA moments for Giannis. But I think NFTs are here to stay, and I think crypto is definitely here to stay. And anybody who thinks it's a fad is, it's been here too long, and it's now taking over. Countries are having cryptocurrency be their sole method of currency, and I think we'll just see as we get more in a global economy that's going to be a thing, and the non-fungible token element of it used for all sorts of things I don't know if you're familiar with Fan Control Football, but Fan Control Football League has the ability for you to use their tokens for each team. There's 8 teams. And then you have the ability to make all the decisions, including what play call is going to be made based on your voting shares, your number of tokens that you own in a particular team.
That's fascinating. And yeah, our managing director, Pierre, will be delighted to hear that you think NFTs are here to stay. He's a big bull on those kind of technologies. So yeah, but I mean, so Rick, thanks a million for joining us. They're all the questions that I had for you today. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to get across just before we go, either from a personal perspective or from a spotlight perspective, obviously.
No, I mean, the one thing that I've learned, and like I've only here 7 months with Spotlight Sports Group, but number one, they're the greatest people in the world, which is fantastic. You always want to work with high character, smart people. So, and that's what I try to surround myself in the whole rest of the career leading up till now. But I will say, like, whatever problem you have, like we now have so many resources where before it was just sort of our creativity and then our elbow grease. We now have so many services and things that have been created for a company that has its roots in horse racing and with the Racing Post and, you know, delivers information to 7,300 betting parlors across the UK and Ireland and just has the resources and ability to solve any of your problems. So whatever your problem is in the sports business, Spotlight Sports Group is your solution.
Perfect. Thanks again for joining us, Rick, and I'll catch up with you soon, I hope.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jake.
Yeah, hello everybody, welcome back, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce my next guest, Brian Clayton, who is the Senior Director of Sales for the Americas at IMG Arena. And looking at your LinkedIn, Brian, a former professional lacrosse player. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a fun little experience in my life earlier on. Unfortunately, age has put me on the sidelines for a little while here, as does most.
You can't be a professional athlete forever, unfortunately.
No.
But thanks for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Yeah, fine, thank you. We've had some good discussions, or we're going to have a good discussion, I should say, about the importance of live streaming for a US sportsbook. And I know you and IMG have got plenty to say on that topic. So are you happy for me to just kick on with some questions?
Yeah, fire away.
Great stuff. So yeah, I mean, a big goal for IMG in the US is kind of, you know, really bringing that sportsbook product to life. And we know Americans, consumers in that market, they want to be entertained, and, you know, they're not going to kind of accept that flat 2D experience. So what is IMG doing to kind of spice things up in this area, for both obviously end customers, but also your clients as well?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. We're doing quite a bit in the space, to be honest. We are, let's start. We are creating purpose-built sports betting products, right? And they're going to be designed to enable customers to have interactive in-play betting experiences on sports. We've implemented some pretty sophisticated data capture utilizing some very advanced technologies. We are using this to create new types and depths of data availability. So what does that really mean, right? So let's take golf, for example. Well, the depth of data that we are collecting allows us to power 35,000 new betting markets at every single tournament. So you look at things like live statistics for every player, every hole, every shot at a latency of seconds that didn't exist. This data has evolved the fan experience and has enabled deeper levels of engagement. So when I say engagement, in addition to that, the betting markets, that is, we are delivering a totally new front-end solution. Our FastPath data feeds combined with live streaming also allow the fans to effectively step inside the ropes in this type of product. We believe that we are ushering in a new era of golf betting, setting a new standard for fan engagement with this type of product. It includes multiple components, right? So you look at the broadcast where you see snippets and highlights of stuff in a production environment of what that looks like. Now you get to look at every single player across the golf course where they're at. So you're talking about live and historical event statistics, detailed visualizations, ultra responsive markets presented in a 2D, as you said, 2D interfaces, but also in 3D interfaces. And when you get to see every single shot, where it is, yardage, location, it's a very, very rich experience, right? I mean, if you look at what the PGA Tour says, they say it's a one-of-a-kind sports betting product that delivers a new dimension of the golf experience for fans around the globe. And you take an operator like BetMGM, where they say that this golf event center allows us to introduce a totally new, captivating concept to our customers. So that's one experience. That's one instance of what we're doing. Additionally to that, and I'll just breeze through it, is what we're doing around the UFC. So we have a golf event center that we do. We also have a UFC event center. And the reason why that one's important is that it's the world's first branded product in that space. So it integrates assets of like UFC IP integrated into the product, like fighter headshots, UFC logos, additionally some marketing assets to drive bettors to the UFC event center. We have this product live with Rush Street. You know, comments that they have is that the UFC Event Center is a next generation of fan engagement, groundbreaking product that will bring greater entertainment value to players' betting experiences.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So those are two examples.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, of course, and how fortunate to be able to lean into that IP of UFC, obviously falling under the Endeavour umbrella. That's a really cool sport that obviously you wouldn't necessarily associate with betting, but presumably that's one of the sports that translates really well to an American audience of sports bettors.
Yeah, I was a big fan even prior to joining IMG Arena, so I still enjoy my Saturday night fight slot. It's a pretty consistent and great experience. Yeah,
of course. And I think, to go back to the sort of parallels between Europe and America, obviously, in Europe we've kind of always had online sports betting, and technology has evolved alongside it. So maybe 15 years ago, if you were betting on golf, you might be able to bet on, I don't know, Colin Montgomery to win the Open, for example, but that was pretty much where that experience ended. Obviously, you guys are creating a much more kind of granular approach to that now. I mean, how can sportsbooks kind of compete for a share of leisure spend when you already have incredible online entertainment options coming from the likes of Netflix, guys that have already perfected this sort of online experience, really?
Yeah. I'd say if Netflix perfected the experience, I wouldn't be sitting there scrolling through all the content like I do when I'm trying to find something, which I was
well, that's refreshing because nearly everybody we speak to uses Netflix or Amazon or Spotify as, their example of a market leader. And it's good to hear someone criticise Netflix for a change, is all I'll say.
Well, I can't be the one to criticize. They're doing a lot of great stuff. I believe they're doing, but I do like how they do add that the little button says just watch something. It's always interesting to see what comes up. But sure. I think so to get onto that topic and answer that question, I think that question really centers around like what that competition is for, right? Leisure spend. I think the competition is for the fans' attention, and in order to capture that attention, you have to build products that complement that viewing experience or the overall enjoyment of the sport, right? Yeah. Whatever you call it. When it comes to sports, I think we're getting into what I would call a data age of sports. We've realized that we need to develop our productized technology and then layer in content and experiences across all touch points to keep fans immersed. And this goes throughout the whole value chain. And the reason why that's important is it enables consistent storytelling. IMG Arena has recently publicly stated really the 4 pillars in meeting this challenge and what we have. These would include things like our sports services, sports betting, sports media, and sports performance, right? And it all starts with the rights holders via our sports services. We help them to grow their reach, to keep the meets, to meet the needs of their existing and potential audience. But it's all underpinned by content creation, right? And it's building out fast, reliable data through configurable applications, player and ball tracking, computer vision capabilities. But data really powers all of those use cases: sports betting, sports media, sports performance. Mm-hmm. And I'd say this is inclusive across a growing suite of products that we've developed and content feeds, and 2 of those being our award-winning golf event center and also the recent DP World shot tracker from a media product.
Yeah, and it's fascinating you talk about this being the data age of sports betting, and also from a consumer point of view, I think data and stats is increasingly relevant, and obviously a lot of the major US sports betting operators kind of have a background in daily fantasy, don't they, where stats is a major part of the experience. And yourself as a former professional athlete, perhaps you could comment a little bit on kind of the importance of statistics and data, and how that compares to a US audience maybe as opposed to a European audience.
Well, I'm always amazed to see how insatiable the appetite is for statistics here in America. Like, there's just never enough information between the markets. Like, the appetite is just, it's insane. And I think that there's, 2 reasons for that, and 2 ways that you differentiate the European customer and the US customer. A lot of it has to do with probably where the eras came in. When the UK had sports betting, I don't know if it was really a mobile first time and era. Now technologies and where the US is being introduced into sports betting. Yeah, you look at where they're being introduced into sports betting, it really is a mobile first era. So I think there's a couple things to come in mind. Like, we all know US sports and leagues will dominate in the US, and that's just traditional. But I think what we find is with streaming now, and instead of the availability of only sports that you see on broadcast and linear TVs where there's a set channel list and you only see really those American sports, with streaming you go to the likes of like ESPN Plus or something like that, and they can just add catalogs of new sports to an endless library and just put them in. People now have access to these fringe sports that they never had before, or these other sports. And what we've determined is, when we've commissioned like H2 Gambling Capital, they suggest in North America that we're going to see notable rises in things like volleyball, table tennis, MMA, which we saw, I guess, in COVID, and then even coming on the heels of it, UFC's doing fantastic, and then golf as well. And golf, in particular, has one of the highest growth rates for any sport, going up from, in this study, I think it was between 2021 and 2026. Golf is one of those that has probably the highest run rate. And tennis as well. Tennis represents a huge opportunity too. We've showcased a preview of our tennis event center at the US Open. So that's another event center that we are then looking to do on top of golf and UFC, and then to tennis as well. So I think some of those sports will be the ones that we would see on the rise up, in addition to the major U.S. leagues, purely because I think the technologies will allow more people to have access to those items.
Yeah, for sure, exactly. It's not just golf and UFC, but you've got all of the different sports, franchises, and leagues, obviously, that are all trying to get their slice of the pie as well. And data lends itself particularly well to some more than others, probably. I'm mindful we're pushed for time, Brian, so I'm just going to ask one more question, if that's okay with you. But I think everyone's aware to some degree that there's currently a marketing war being waged in the US. Although perhaps we've seen kind of the first examples of that being pulled back slightly in recent weeks, but most commentators will tell you that it's product that will eventually kind of win out in the US. Would you agree with that statement? And where do you think kind of live streaming, a bread and butter product for you, kind of fits into that essential product portfolio for operators and for clients?
Yeah, sure, certainly. So I think I do. So fundamentally, I do agree with that statement. I think we've seen a big spend in marketing to acquire customers, and reasonably so, because you can't just open up a shop and not have everybody know that you're open for business. So I think you've had spend in educating customers that, hey, we're open for business, this is who we are in these jurisdictions, and that's going to happen. But you're going to shift from acquiring customers to retaining customers, and the one way of doing that is product, right? So the US customer is sophisticated, they demand a better product and a good user experience, and I think the guys that are doing well have, in the early stages, done a better implementation of that product, whether it's better sign-ins, better product availability, better content, whatever it is. I think we're going to see an evolution of it, but I also think that you're going to see an evolution in customers wanting to move, or operators wanting to move from a transactional experience to something where they're more an experiential platform in something that there's a stickiness factor to. Right, where they want to go to, like the way that Amazon is, like that's the first source of where you go to price check anything is you go to Amazon, right? Because they reliably have all the content. So I think streaming fits in as a retention tool, because the primary way of experiencing sports is, if you're not playing it, right, is either attending it or watching it live. And the only way to get that is to have that on the platform. And if you have that on the platform, you create opportunities where a customer comes in. There's something to be said about feelings, and stats tell one story, but there's nothing like watching a game. And streaming, being on your platform and integrated, allows that person to stay on platform as opposed to leaving and going and taking their attention elsewhere. And you talked about leisure time earlier, and I think it's competing for, again, fans' attention. And live streaming is one of those components that is going to be critical in keeping that better on platform.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the whole concept is to keep the customer on the platform, and if you can bring the stream to that platform, that's a really, really great way of doing that. And it's great to hear you comment on the kind of, I think it's right, we're in a bit of an acquisition stage at the moment, but it will be the kind of businesses that show their retention capabilities as well through products like live streaming that will really win out in the end. And I know we have some more really interesting discussions booked on that for this session. But Brian, I think we're just about out of time, so I want to say, thank you very much for joining me. It's been great chatting with you, and best of luck with everything in the future with IMG. And of course, if you ever decide to get back into playing or coaching lacrosse as well.
Yeah, playing. I think the body's past that point. I am looking forward to my son getting into the game, and have been helping out a little bit with the local teams. And but yeah, no, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today, Jake. And welcome questions anytime.
Great, thanks for joining us, Brian. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce my guest, Jonathan Doubilet, who is the VP of Business Operations for Playtech in the US. Jonathan, how are you doing?
Rather well this morning, thanks, Jake. A bit cold here, -5 at the moment, but hope you have better weather over there.
Yeah, where are you joining us from?
I'm based here in New York. Actually, specifically, I'm in Brooklyn, but our HQ is in Manhattan right now.
Yeah, -5. That sounds horrible to me. It's a bit milder here. No wonder you've got the heating on full blast. Listen, thanks a lot for joining me. Obviously, I just told the viewers who you are, but do you want to give yourself, a little overview of what your job is at Playtech?
Yeah, sure. So I've been with the company for near on a decade, basically not doing the same thing the entire time. I started off in product management way back when, specifically on the sports betting side of things. And Playtech has grown, went from stride to stride since then. Started off bread and butter being, online casino, or iGaming actually, as it would be called here in the U.S. So sports betting was a new thing. Throughout the years, I've gone on and leveraged my background in finance to basically jump from positions such as corporate development director of some of our newly acquired companies in the sports betting realm over in Europe, amongst them Obenga in Sweden, Geniety in the UK, and others such as Best Gaming Technology in Austria. I've always been, aligned with the iGaming side of things, and even jumping back and forth throughout the years. I've been in the U.S. now for 2 years in my current capacity. Basically, Playtech only really started here in 2020, which is a little bit, late as some would say, but from my perspective, it's given us a good advantage in terms of seeing where the failings of others have occurred, and given us clear-cut opportunities as to where real revenue can be generated.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's what we're hoping to talk about today. Our session is particularly going to focus on iGaming in the US. And, I think most people are probably clued up to some degree about online sports betting in the States, just because of the amount of hype. But I think the iGaming sort of online casino situation is maybe less clear. Could you perhaps start with like a deep dive on the current state of play regarding the US iGaming regulation?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely not clear-cut compared to other countries, and I'll ask anybody who is read up on the subject to forgive me, but I'll go over a brief kind of lay of the land to show viewers where we are today. So iGaming started here in its infancy in a legalized manner in 2013. That was actually about 7 years after what was called the UEGA, or the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, came into play back in 2006. And that was a day in which all, what we'd call them today, gray market operators were officially banned from doing business here in the internet gaming space.
Shut down.
Everybody pulled out. Yeah, everybody pulled out at that time. I shouldn't say everybody, but Playtech and several others, most of the industry pulled out at that time, abiding by local laws. Nobody wanted to get on the bad side of U.S. authorities. So that was kind of the status quo for some time, and I won't get into sports betting at the moment. But the first foray into iGaming, real iGaming as we know it, online casino, online poker, etc., that was actually in 2013. New Jersey passed a set of laws which made that legal. And for many years, New Jersey was the, I would say, iGaming mecca of the United States, but it was the only iGaming, only state where it was actually legal. So what we saw that year was a number of European operators come about, a number of land-based, operators here that have brick and mortar establishments across the United States. It should be mentioned that until the 70s and 80s, most land-based gaming was taking place in Nevada. Strictly in Nevada.
Vegas.
Yeah, exactly. But the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act of 1988 saw a lot of tribes all over the state start launching brick and mortar casinos of their own. And you saw a lot more commercial activity as well in the 80s. Actually, it was only in 2004, it was rather late, that even Pennsylvania opened its first brick and mortar casino. So outside of Atlantic City and Nevada, there really wasn't very much until the 80s, 90s. Now, fast forward a few years, and back to the point of my story here. is that, New Jersey in 2013 launched, but there was no sports betting at the time. A lot of what people have come to know as PASPA, or the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, that prevented anybody outside of a certain few key states, which I won't get into right now. But outside of these key states, nobody could actually offer legalized sports betting, particularly mobile sports betting. That all changed with the repeal of PASPA in 2018. And probably just to give an idea of what's occurred since then. So since 2018, the repeal, there have been about 31 states actually, as of my counting today, 31 states that have legalized sports betting in one way or another. And if you look at that from a chronological point of view, that's about 8 states per year since it was legalized.
Yeah.
Whereas when you look at iGaming and online casinos, as a lot would term them, there have been about 5 states legalized since the repeal of PASPA. Okay, and that averages to about less than 1 a year. So compare that, 8 per year sports betting, less than 1 per year for iGaming, and we're on a slow upward trajectory for iGaming. In fact, sports betting, it's estimated that about 46 states, or about 98% of the addressable U.S. population, will be able to sports bet in one way or another by 2026, with only 7 states at present, and many of those having a limited capacity in terms of competition due to monopolies or other reasons. I don't see this type of trajectory for iGaming, albeit I think that 1 state per year will continue for a little while and could rise exponentially if certain key states tip the needle and cross that barrier.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and the regulation is proving trickier to get over the line than it is with online sports betting, it seems. So that was a great concise history of what's happened in the US in terms of iGaming. But fast forwarding to right now, the situation as it stands. Which states provide the biggest opportunity from an iGaming perspective, kind of both for Playtech and for your operator clients? And perhaps we could start with those that already are regulated, and then move on to ones which might potentially change the game should they regulate in the future.
Yeah, sure thing. So just as of today, I mentioned 7 states. Now, 4 of those offer unfettered type of competition and product ranges that I would consider akin to a European state-sanctioned iGaming infrastructure. I would nail those down to Michigan, West Virginia, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Those 4 states basically offer casino, poker, bingo, anything that I shouldn't say anything, but most forms of popular
the full iGaming product portfolio, so to speak.
Correct. You've got 2 monopoly states, or oligopoly in the case of Connecticut. So Delaware is one which is considered a monopoly run by the lottery. Rather small state, Connecticut, not a sizable state, high GDP. But there are only 2 licenses that have been awarded, and those have gone to the 2 dominant tribes there, which have partnered respectively with DraftKings and FanDuel. If we look at today and the outlook for the next few years, so I mean, right now, at present, there are 13 states with iGaming bills tabled, and those have a low degree of momentum behind them. I do not expect, in this session at least, that any of them will get anything passed. The most likely amongst them seem to have been Indiana, but there was a deadline set for February 1st, where some consensus was needed in order for bills to progress. The session is now effectively ended. So we're going to have to wait until the next session to start before we see any type of momentum again. Even in the next session, it's a short session, and I don't expect there to be anything passed in that time. Now, mind you, you have seen some rumors, or not rumors, but actually talk of bills in states such as New York, right, where sports betting was just launched and to a massive degree of success. I think that's going to be a catalyst for many states when it comes to sports betting particularly. They've surpassed any other state since launching. And I do expect that, even with the high tax rate, to be quite successful, even though the incumbents they're challenging that tax rate. But every state is going to look at that, the amount of taxation or tax revenue that's been generated, and look to copy that. Now, how that translates to iGaming, I'm looking at the Midwest right now. The New York iGaming bill is going to pass. Senator Adabo in New York State has gone on record to say that he's not considering that to be too promising at present.
It's not going to happen anytime soon, I don't think.
No. You never know. You could be surprised. I would say New York is a wild card state. Nobody expected that to happen, but I think that the success of sports betting just made it kind of a thought that crossed people's minds. But let's look to the Midwest. These are often progressive states. They're amongst the first that adopted online sports betting when it was legalized. Other than New Jersey and Pennsylvania, you have states like Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, even Ohio coming up with sports betting, Kansas, Kentucky. These are all states which I do think, and I know that a number of them have had commissions studied over the past few years as to the effectiveness of iGaming, legalizing iGaming, and what consequences that would have for their economies and also social welfare systems.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, and every scenario has to be taken into account by legislators on a state-by-state basis, obviously. What are some of the kind of barriers to entry at the moment regarding that expansion of iGaming throughout the US? Is it political opposition? Is it purely the cost of expansion? I mean, do you have a view on that?
So, I mean, if we just take a step back and don't talk about legislative efforts and any of the laws so much as you look at the ecosystem for, let's just say, the states that are up and running today. What are the barriers to entry for any operator or supplier, for that matter, who wants to enter? There are a number, and I've seen left and right different European operators and otherwise, foreign operators try and come in, as well as local operators, where they've wished to establish themselves in states like New Jersey, where you have online sports betting and iGaming. One of the first things to take into account, which is different from most states overseas, is the Wire Act, the Federal Wire Act, which essentially prevents sports betting transactions, and actually it's been extended under certain interpretations to online casino transactions, although that can be disputed. But from those crossing state lines, what that means is that any prospective operator who wants to operate here has to have a separate tech stack, i.e. servers, transactional servers installed on a state-by-state basis. So you want to operate in more than one state, you want to get into New Jersey, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and so on. Let's just start with those three. You need 3 sets of iGaming servers, 3 sets of sports betting servers, and everything, the PAM to underpin that. That can become a costly affair. Let's forget for a second that you just have that on tap. If we go to the supplier side of things, the CapEx becomes even more monumental. Us, for example, in the live dealer vertical, the Wire Act and the consequences of what I just described have actually resulted in an ecosystem where if you want to offer live dealer gaming in a majority of the states where iGaming is legal today, you have to actually fund and build casinos in state. So when we talk about New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, you're talking about major investment in not only the construction of the studio with all of its surrounding technologies, but also the staffing of the casino or of the live dealer studio. So that's a major barrier for entry for most suppliers in that vertical. The only exception to what I just said is the West Virginia, which is considering reciprocal relations with Pennsylvania, where they would allow for streams from Pennsylvania to be beamed into West Virginia for live dealer online gambling purposes.
Yeah, and there's obviously only really a handful or less than a handful of live suppliers sort of operational and active in the US as we speak. And I think, you touched on a pertinent point. If you need to build a studio in every single state that you want to service, it's hardly like in Europe when, you can have a state in Riga or in Georgia or in Latvia and sort of reach a huge population just from one building with one set of costs. It's a completely different kettle of fish in the US.
Definitely is. And it even goes beyond that. The laws of each state are so different from one another. When it comes to technical standards, they're quite similar, but the actual laws, which are in many ways derived from brick and mortar laws, make things incredibly restrictive. And I'm not going to say that is a bad thing. I mean, if you have enough capital and you have the will and the way, you can make it here. But you have to be prepared for challenges on a state-by-state basis. If you think you can go in with, your 100 slot titles into all three, major iGaming states at the moment, unfettered, get them certified by your general laboratory, whether that be, GLI or BMM or otherwise, you'd be sadly mistaken. New Jersey has its own laboratory, test lab, and you have to have your game certified by that test lab in order to be able to offer them in the state of New Jersey. Whereas Pennsylvania and Michigan will allow for third-party laboratory testing that they have to verify thereafter. But on top of that, you have this complex set of laws which dictate such things as odds payout. Pennsylvania and Michigan offer limited odds payouts, much more limited than that which exist in New Jersey. Side bets, for example, on table games in Pennsylvania are massively restricted. They almost don't exist. The only ones that do exist are codified into law. So you're left in a state where, one thing I didn't mention is taxation. You want to go to Pennsylvania with those slots, is you're going to be charged 54% tax on those slots.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So all of this makes for basically an economy, or an iGaming economy, which is incredibly, I could say fragmented, but it's just so different from one place to the other that you have to have a very precise strategy as to how you're going to get over those hurdles.
Yeah, for sure. Really interesting, and I'm mindful that we're coming to the end of our session together, Jonathan, but there's one other topic I really wanted to talk to you about today, which is kind of the cross-sell opportunity and how Playtech can help from that perspective. There's a lot of operators, as we've discussed, putting a lot of money into online sports betting, but they'll all tell you, iGaming is the product with the best margins. That's where the profit comes from, effectively. You've got a range of different competitors at the moment, whether it be DraftKings and FanDuel from that kind of DFS background. You've got the European guys coming in, and then you've got the massive land-based casino giants like BetMGM, obviously. How can they sort of capitalize on their own USPs to sort of facilitate that cross-sell, and where does Playtech stand on cross-selling players from sports betting to iGaming and vice versa, I suppose?
So, I mean, you mentioned basically those with intrinsic presences here that I would facilitate themselves in the way of brick and mortar casinos, chains across the US. You mentioned MGM. There are many others. Penn National, Caesars, and so on. And then I would divide kind of the operators here into those two categories with outliers, of course. You've got those with an endemic presence, and then you've got those with the endemic presence in the form of having a prior DFS operation, which still exists, obviously, for a number of reasons. Both have the advantage of being able to cross-sell on that user base that they built up through their brick-and-mortar loyalty rewards programs or through their DFS spending pre-PASPA. Those companies are best positioned to capitalize upon their user bases, and I would say more so those that have a long-standing profitable user base, such as the land-based brick and mortar chains, are even better positioned. They have casino players, born and bred casino players. They have a large database of them. They already profit and generate quite significant profits on those players. Those are the best for cross-sell, and being able to convert into a profitable iGaming operation. You'll see FanDuel and DraftKings dominating the market, absolutely, along with MGM, also to a great extent. And yes, they've capitalized on their sports betting or on their sports-focused user base. The cross-sell is probably the hardest thing at the end of the day. We talk a lot about cross-selling sports bettors into iGaming, but we don't do so much on the other side of things, iGaming into sports betting. It's a much harder cross-sell. Sports betting can be, I would say, imposing. It can be a little bit, something that your regular slots player would feel a little bit threatened by in terms of, what do the odds mean? What am I even getting into here? Do I understand sports?
Yeah.
They're almost two different types of players, but where we see the most significant cross-sell is between sports bettors and table games players. Table games players tend to view themselves as more shrewd, more calculated.
And that fits with sports where you think you have an edge over the house.
Exactly. And where we tend to capitalize that, particularly overseas, and where we're going to be doing it here as well, we're already live and active in all 3 iGaming states, and very soon more states than that, also with sports betting in our platform. But what we'll copy from overseas is having these cross-sell experiences between sports betting and our live dealer games. Now, live dealer by nature, again, it's mainly all table games, and if you build into that iGaming or table game experience with the live dealer, when you build in such assets such as streams, statistics, tickers with the lines or odds going across the screen, but even more so, you embed things like bet slips for the sports book. So let's take an example of Cheltenham in the UK that happened recently.
Of course.
We launched with William Hill a dedicated Cheltenham live dealer experience, and you can see what's happening in the races, who the winners are, and with the races going off one after the other in such quick succession, you don't really want to miss out on the races, but you might want to, in between, be spinning the roulette wheel or playing a hand of blackjack. Well, if you can build that and educate the American gambler on that type of experience, you can really capture that demographic or that specific segment that is interested in both table games and sports betting, not lose one to the other vertical, and have them playing all of their games in one place. That is key to capturing that demographic here. I'll hand it to you. There's also the reverse, converting sports bettors into iGaming players, whether it be slots or table games, but we can have probably another few sessions on that if need be.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're right. We could talk about this for a long time, but you've hit the nail on the head already. The key is about entertaining the customer and sort of cutting those gaps out between entertainment experiences. And if, in between table games or in between sports betting events, if you can cross-sell the customer into the other, then, that works perfectly for the operator and the end customer, I suppose. But a great summation there, Jonathan, and thank you very much for joining me. That was a really interesting chat.
Appreciate your time, and I look forward to speaking again, Jake.
Great, thanks.